Welcome to Session 2 of We Care, a compassionate response for Ascension Associates, the how-to session of this three-part series. This presentation is brought to you by Ascension, Wisconsin, EAP. Let's begin with a quote from John D. Weaver, licensed clinical social worker. People are always changed by disasters and other traumatic life events, but they need not be damaged by them. Our objectives today are to discuss normal stress reactions and protective factors, define the principles and paradigm of the We Care initiative, discuss considerations and strategies when facilitating a We Care response, and talk about possible reservations about facilitating a We Care response and how to overcome them. Just a few words before we dig in. This material may not be new to you. Maybe you know some of it, maybe you know all of it, maybe you know none of it. The intention is to raise awareness for the We Care initiative, as well as educate associates on what it means and how we can live it out. We ask that you please carefully consider how you can use this information, both personally and professionally. Normal stress reactions. When a person undergoes any type of stress, say a near-miss car accident, their body begins a biochemical process that puts them on high alert and tries to keep them safe from danger. We call this the fight or flight system, also known as the sympathetic nervous system. The fight or flight response releases adrenaline and cortisol into our bloodstream, which makes us feel jittery, shaky, or on edge. Our muscles tense, our heart pounds, our breath becomes quick and shallow. Digestion slows, our immune system is suppressed, and survival is our body's main focus. This is a normal stress response, and you can probably remember a time when you were very anxious or scared and you felt some of these mechanisms in action. When a person goes through a crisis, stress, or trauma, that fight or flight kicks in. If the crisis lasts for a long time, however, our body may begin to feel chronic stress. And these symptoms don't just last a few minutes or hours, but rather we begin to notice changes that last for days or weeks. Physical symptoms may include feeling agitated, jumpy or restless, having chronic pain or frequent illness, difficulty sleeping, feeling fatigued or exhausted, having a little or no appetite or feeling nauseous, feeling detached or withdrawn from others or things that we used to enjoy, and having very low motivation. Mental symptoms include difficulty concentrating or remembering things, preoccupation with patients or work, intrusive thoughts of things you've seen or heard maybe at work or on the news, including flashbacks and nightmares. Emotional symptoms may be feeling vulnerable, anxious or afraid, having wide mood swings, happy one minute, angry the next, a range of emotions including anger, resentment, guilt, sad, etc., reduced empathy for others, and even thoughts of self-harm or death. Sometimes people have a crisis of faith. Maybe they have difficulty finding joy, wonder if God cares or even exists, and sometimes experience a loss of hope. Relational symptoms may be socially withdrawing from friends, family, and coworkers, excessive blame towards others or self, and poor boundaries. People sometimes wonder why some people are very affected by stressful or traumatic circumstances while others aren't. It basically comes down to the fact that everyone is different. Personality is a factor. Some people are naturally sensitive or empathetic, while others are not. It also depends on a person's age or developmental stage, which affects how they take in and understand information, whether or not they have experienced something similar, or what coping skills they have or have not developed over time. Life experiences play a large role in how a person's brain develops. For example, did the person have adequate nurturing, stimulation, safety, and trust with caregivers as a child, or did they experience abuse, neglect, fear, or other circumstances that makes them more sensitive or reactive to crisis situations in the present? Epigenetic research is finding that the experiences of our ancestors play a role in our genetic makeup. How they coped with trauma has an impact on how we cope with it. Research is growing in this area of study, but one fascinating study called Descendants of Holocaust Survivors Have Altered Stress Hormones by T. Rodriguez sheds a little bit of light on this phenomena. Other reasons why some people are more affected by stress and trauma has to do with the event itself. Severity and chronicity of the event is a factor, as well as whether it was an interpersonal act, violence against fellow humans, or an act of nature. Acts of violence or interpersonal trauma tend to have a higher stress reaction than acts of nature. A person's environment also plays a role. If the person has access to safety and other resources, as well as support from others, they are more likely to have higher levels of resilience than those who don't. Social connection is a very strong protective factor. Social connection is a major factor in every type of recovery. According to research, socially active individuals report above average happiness, lower levels of depression and anxiety, and higher levels of resiliency. On the flip side, low social connection is associated with hostility, social anxiety, jealousy, low interpersonal trust, low self-esteem, and low agreeableness. Consider this time of social distancing. We won't go into this in depth, but I just want you to consider for a moment what kind of effect social distancing might have on a person's well-being, especially during times of crisis. What are some ways we can overcome those barriers? One more thing to mention. Research also shows that quality of relationships is much more important than quantity. It's better to have a few close friends that you trust and depend on than 1,000 Facebook acquaintances. During times of stress and trauma, our bodies are biochemically designed to bond to others. This is called traumatic bonding. In times of trouble, consider how important it is to connect and include people in supportive interventions and being very intentional about not isolating or siloing individuals. In addition to personal protective factors, there are certain traits of an organization that provides protective factors for associates as well. These include promoting positive values, policies, and behavior, promoting a sense of community and belonging, not tolerating aggressive, discriminating, or disrespectful behavior, transparent and honest communication at all levels of the organization, letting people's voices be heard, and valuing the input of others, making decisions in fair, unbiased ways, increasing access to supportive resources such as spiritual services or EAP. Finally, it is important to mention the idea of silver linings. People have tremendous capacity to recover. We call this resilience. Post-traumatic growth is when a person comes out stronger, smarter, and more resilient because they survived a trauma or crisis. We would never wish difficulty on anyone, but in the midst of it, we can always look for silver linings. Sometimes, in the midst of trauma, people aren't ready to acknowledge these, but for some people, and especially post-crisis, it is helpful to reflect back on the resilience a person demonstrated, as well as the positive changes and outlooks that were born from it. Now we will discuss the background of the We Care response, including widely accepted models of care that contributed to our current best practice We Care model. A little review from Session 1. A We Care response is a strategy to be with someone who is in distress by comforting them, helping them feel safe and calm, assessing needs and concerns, protecting people from further harm, providing emotional support, helping to address immediate basic needs, and helping people access information, services, and social support. The Ascension We Care response integrates a trauma-informed care approach. A way to understand trauma is this. Trauma-informed care is a strengths-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of the responsiveness to the impact of trauma that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors, and that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. We won't go into great depth on trauma-informed care today, but it is easy to understand this approach based on the 4 R's. Realize. Realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. Research clearly shows that most people have experienced trauma in their lifetime, and we must universally operate under this assumption. 2. Recognize. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved in the system. We have discussed normal trauma reactions earlier in this presentation. Trauma-informed helpers are intentional about noticing the signs, which leads us to 3. Respond. Respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. We will discuss how to do this in more detail. Finally, 4. Resist re-traumatization. The most important aspect to remember in trauma-informed care, as well as in a We Care response, is to do no harm. Sometimes we find that we just can't help, and that's okay, but it's important that our interventions do not hurt. Here are some traditional views and negative assumptions of individuals who have experienced trauma and more positive trauma-informed reframes. This person is sick can be replaced with this person has experienced trauma. They are weak becomes they have survived. They should be over this already is not helpful. Instead, recovery is a process and takes time. They are making it up is a common traditional belief that creates a lot of stigma and hopelessness for victims. Instead, we can think of it as, this is hard to hear and harder to talk about. They want attention can be changed to, they are crying out for help. This thought is still very common. Don't ask them about it or they'll get upset. This is typically not true. Instead, we can say, talking about trauma gives people permission to heal. Finally, they will never get over it can be replaced with, people are resilient and can recover. This is a quick review from our last session of the 12 principles of PFA, of which the We Care response is closely aligned. Make a connection. Help people be safe. Be kind, calm, and compassionate. Meet people's basic needs. Listen. Give realistic assurance. Encourage good coping. Help people connect. Give accurate, timely information. Make a referral. End the conversation. And take good care of yourself. Next, we will discuss how to facilitate a We Care response. The Ascension We Care model, though derived from trauma-informed care and psychological first aid, is a unique approach that has 3 basic tenets: look, listen, link. These 3 tenets make it easy to remember the process of facilitating a We Care response. The first tenet is look. What has happened? What is happening? Are there any safety needs that need to be attended to first, including things like active shooters, uncontained illness, open wounds, or other things that must be attended to immediately? Safety always comes first. Once the situation has been stabilized, look around and consider who needs help, who has immediate needs, what are the emotional reactions of the people involved, Where should you invest your efforts first? After you have taken inventory of the situation, next it's time to listen. Start your approach. Introduce yourself. Ask an open-ended question such as, "How are you doing?" Actively listen to the person and validate their feelings and experiences. Maintain a calm demeanor and remain person-centered. Ask what they need now and brainstorm ways they can get their immediate needs met. Don't try to fix them or handle situations on their behalf. Simply be empathetic and supportive and show you care. Finally, link or connect to resources. Sometimes the person would benefit from a connection with a close family member, friend, or supportive teammate. If there are practical or immediate needs, help to facilitate a resolution if possible. Give information about other resources and sources of support, such as your employee assistance program, hotlines, or support groups. Let them know they can reach out to you again if they need to at a later time. These are the 3 basic tenets of the We Care model, and we will go over each of them in more depth so you feel fully prepared and ready to go out and practice this model on your own. Look, who should be approached? Sometimes the answer is obvious. The person visibly shaking, upset, crying, yelling, or otherwise showing signs of distress. Often, though, it's not so obvious. Many people internalize distress and don't show their emotions outwardly. That's why it's important to check in and connect with everyone at some point, so individuals are not accidentally isolated or left out. Look, is it the right time to approach? If the person is busy or distracted by job tasks or attending to others, it is probably not a good time to start a conversation about their well-being. Wait until you have their attention and they have a little more time to talk. And remember, safety always comes first. It is not appropriate to ask about someone's emotional well-being if there is an imminent safety risk. Make sure the situation is stabilized before initiating a We Care response. Also, pay attention to location. It is difficult to have a serious conversation when there is a lot of noise, distraction, or no privacy. If possible, offer to move the conversation to a more private place. If you don't have a good relationship, now is not the time to be their best friend. Maybe ask someone else to reach out. Come with a few good questions to start a conversation that feel comfortable to you. Practice a little bit, maybe with your spouse, your kids, or your dog. Get comfortable initiating conversations and asking good questions. Here are a few conversation starters to get you rolling. I'm concerned about you. How are you doing? What can I do to help you right now? You seem tired. Are you sleeping well? I heard you say you want to go to sleep forever. I'm wondering if you're okay. Active listening is crucial to this process. Reflect back what you hear them say. Use their language. If they say things like down in the dumps or out of control, use those phrases when you reflect back to them. Maintain a calm, relaxed demeanor. You may feel tempted to act frantic or impulsively, but resist the urge to join in the chaos. Your calm demeanor will have a calming effect on others. Mirror their posture. For example, they are sitting, you should sit. Make eye contact as appropriate. Use body language and verbal affirmations to demonstrate that you are listening. Uh-huh, I see, or are easy ways to show that you hear them. Validate the person and their feelings. This does not mean you necessarily agree, but it does mean you can take their perspective and understand where they are coming from. This is called empathy. Now is not the time to argue about facts or perceptions. Try to listen for feelings, even if they don't use feeling words themselves. Naming feelings for them can help to calm emotions. Here are some examples of validating statements. I hear what you're saying. That sounds extremely difficult. How did you cope? I can hear the frustration in your voice. Were you scared? Now consider this scenario. You've identified a person in distress. You approach them at a time when they aren't busy or distracted. It's a quiet area. You start the conversation. I've noticed you've been more quiet than usual. With everything that's going on, I can imagine you are feeling overwhelmed or stressed. Are you doing okay? The person says, I'm fine. Then you probe a little more. That's good. What are you doing to cope? The person looks irritated and says, I don't know. I just kind of need some space right now. What do you do? The best thing is to remain person-centered and give them the space they ask for. Let them know that if they do want to talk later, that they can come find you. But don't badger them to talk if they really don't want to. Maybe check in on them again a few days later. Let them know you care, but don't be pushy. Link. Help the person connect to other resources. Other resources may include EAP Spiritual Services or the Mission Hotline. 211 is a clearinghouse for all kinds of community and national resources. If the person has needs such as financial concerns, housing, food, support groups, or anything else, 211 is a great place to call to find what's available in your area. Sometimes it may be appropriate to call together. This is especially important in instances of risk or safety issues. For example, you might say, You've mentioned that you have thought about killing yourself. It's important to me that you stay safe. So let's call EAP right now so you can get the help you need. Sometimes it's okay to just give information and encourage them to call, especially if you don't have any immediate concerns about safety. For instance, you might say, You've told me you've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately. Do you know about EAP? Then tell them about the program. Here's the contact information. I hope you will call. Let them know if and when you will follow up and talk to them again. The follow-up is a great time to check back and see if they were able to access the suggested resources and if the resources were helpful to them. Here are some examples of things not to say, as well as some validating responses to use instead. While listening or participating in a session like this, it's easy to recognize the things we shouldn't say, but when we are in the moment, sometimes we forget, or are frustrated or stressed ourselves and revert to some of these unhelpful responses. A large part of this process is not only actively listening to the person, but also to yourself, and making sure you are in a good headspace to support others. Here are a few more things to keep in mind. Don't personalize feelings of frustration or anger. The person is probably not having a great day. Their reaction is not about you, so don't make it about you. Avoid re-traumatization. Use low-impact disclosure. Avoid graphic retellings of gruesome details if possible. Be cautious in your use of humor. If you do use humor, make sure it's uplifting, not degrading or harmful. Wanting to help too much may imply they can't do it on their own. Be supportive, but don't take over, and do not act on their behalf. An example of taking over might be, I'll go talk to your supervisor about that. Or, I'll call this resource and have them do X, Y, Z for you. Finally, don't reassure that everything will be okay. You don't know that. However, you can offer hope by saying things like, You are very resilient. We'll get through this. I'm here for you. We'll do this together. It's important in these interactions that you always respect privacy and treat the person's story as confidential. Ultimately, it all boils down to do no harm while doing your best. Now you can do it. Are you ready? Though you may now know everything to do to initiate a compassionate, we care response, some people may still be feeling anxious. If that's you, don't worry. It's normal to feel anxious when trying something new. Here are some common thoughts and feelings that people have when starting out. I don't know what to say. I have other work to do. Heavy emotions make me uncomfortable. What if I don't do it right? What if they talk about suicide, self-harm, or something else I'm not prepared to hear? This affects me too. Here are some things to keep in mind to calm your fears. Have reasonable expectations of this process and your part in it. You are not the savior of the world. You are just offering support. And remember, EAP is always a resource if the situation becomes too heavy for you to handle. This is not therapy. It is compassionate presence. Get support for yourself from others who are We Care helpers. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. A smile, a nod, or Kleenex goes a long way. Take breaks. Don't be a martyr. If you care for patients, you can do this for your peers. It just takes purposeful attention and empathy. You can do it. In this session, we discuss normal stress reactions and protective factors, define the principles and paradigm of the We Care initiative, discuss considerations and strategies when facilitating a We Care response, and talked about possible reservations about facilitating a We Care response and how to overcome them. I want to quickly remind you to visit your Ascension Ministries COVID-19 Associate Self-Care site for additional resources, information, and support. On behalf of Ascension Wisconsin EAP, I want to thank you for your time and your investment in this initiative, and hope you will join us for Session 3, Self-Care.